Pixar has a surprisingly historic cutting room floor. Whilst on the surface there's only really been one big cancelled production, when looking into the more uneasy corners of their business through the years, there's evidence and leaks of several Pixar films that we simply never got to see. Some for the best, some are interesting to think about. All in one place today are the 5 cancelled Pixar movies you will never see. We've trimmed the ads, the outros, and interruptions, so please enjoy. Welcome back to our official second episode of the Cancelled series, and behind the scenes I've been shuffling through all sorts of different prompts. There's a lot of productions that get snipped before they end. With it being Miles Morales season, I was thinking of making a Spider-Man 4 episode, though it's been pretty well covered before, and then there's also apparently a whole Raven solo film that I'd like to cover, but there's almost nothing on that thing at all. And for this kind of thing to work, I've got to find a good balance between those two extremes. There is a Who Framed Roger Rabbit sequel that dives into World War II and has a whole Nazi plot going on, but I figured that was a little bit too heavy to bring up in 2020. So instead, we're flipping to something much more easy on the eyes, the beloved family favorite production team behind Pixar. And even with narrowing down to that one category of a production studio, there's several projects that just never came to fruition. And really, there was one big main event that spewed out like 3 different piles of scrap. We'll likely cover just about everything on the channel eventually, but starting us off, we're tackling one of the greatest child film franchises of all time today, Toy Story. Now, you may think looking at 2020 as a whole, we've been feeling the effects of one of the worst timelines, right? But things still aren't all too bad, as we've still got Pixar. Duh, right? Of course we have Pixar. Were we ever really in genuine danger of that not being the case? Well, yes, actually. Once upon a time, Pixar as a company was going through a mini kind of crisis that would have deeply affected the kind of content that they put out. And it all comes down to corporate contracting, because it always does. Back in 1996, Pixar had released the original Toy Story, and as is probably common knowledge, it really popped off, gaining the company enough popularity and leverage to sign a 5-movie deal with Disney, a great opportunity, all things considered. And that would cover A Bug's Life, Monsters Inc., Finding Nemo, The Incredibles, Cars, and I guess even though it's not part of the 5, Toy Story 2, too. Well, see, here's the thing. Toy Story 2 was a little bit of an oddball project, since it was originally planned to be a direct-to-video release, and so, at the time of this deal being made, it wasn't actually included as part of the 5-film setup. But with the production of the sequel looking very promising early on, Pixar then decided to eventually upgrade it to a full theatrical release. And with its success, the issues then began to arise, with the then CEO of Pixar, Steve Jobs, and the then CEO of Disney, Michael Eisner, completely failing to come to an agreement over the terms of any future deal, mostly because of the spout of Toy Story 2. And in 2004, Pixar then went ahead to end their relationship with Disney, with Steve Jobs stating that after 10 months of trying to strike a deal with Disney, we're moving on. We had a great run together, one of the most successful in Hollywood history, and it's a shame that Disney won't be participating in Pixar's future successes. Oof. However, thanks to that original deal, Disney actually controlled the rights to the characters up to and including Cars, as this was set to be the final movie of the original deal. And so Eisner foresaw a way to continue those movies without Pixar in the picture at all. And so, with the legalities on their side, Eisner launched Circle 7 Animation in 2004, having the sole purpose of creating sequels to these Pixar movies that Disney now owned the rights to. Yeah, and people thought Toy Story 4 was a cash grab. This was some literal movie bloodsucking, and apparently this studio production was given the nickname Pixart. I love it. Now, right off the bat, they had 3 whole sequels churning in the works. A Finding Nemo sequel, a Monsters Inc. sequel, and a Toy Story 2 sequel. Literally day one, it was like, knockoffs everywhere. Now, we'll cover the other 2 another day soon enough, I'm sure, but we'll be focusing on Toy Story 3 today, as it is the most fleshed out of the bunch and their first piece of work, so obviously it went the furthest. Now obviously there is a real Toy Story 3 now, but there are no connections from that to this production. In fact, any work put into this original threequel was actually ignored by the real Pixar once they got their hands on the sequel project. Though, interestingly enough, there are a handful of similarities, but I'll point them out as we get to them. So, with all that in mind, let's listen in to this alternate timeline version of a Toy Story that could have been. So the premise didn't take place years and years later, but seemingly pretty close to the originals, and it wasn't all about Andy or the generic theming of growing up. No, it was about just toys doing some antics, your kind of standard in-universe stuff. Toy Story 2 had already established the worldwide mass-produced phenomena of the Buzz Lightyear craze, and this film was to show a whole new element of that even further, with Buzz Lightyear starting to malfunction and being sent to Taiwan to be fixed. That's a real thing. That's actually the plot. Now, obviously, we don't have all of the concept art and certainly no clips of the scrap production, but there are a good handful of concepts, including this one here that was to show the Buzz Lightyear production factory. And of course, with Buzz being shipped to an entirely different country, the rest of the toy gang aren't too pleased and naturally go on an adventure to retrieve and rescue their burdened friend, which, when you look at it really, just kind of sounds like a mirrored retelling of the second film. Instead of Woody being taken for being a prized antique and the others chasing his tail, now it's just Buzz being taken away for reparation purposes. I guess on the one hand you could call it symbolically cyclical, but another word for that is also lazy. Anyway, of course, there's more to the story than just that. The reasoning towards actually hunting for Buzz rather than just waiting for his reparation to complete is actually because Buzz's malfunction is, I guess, a universal problem across the entire line, with the company behind him, Waka Waka Toy Company, choosing to recall every Buzz Lightyear toy back to the factory. Yeah, remember that aisle full of Buzz Lightyears from the second movie? Well, here it is, now all being recalled. Honestly, it's actually a pretty interesting direction to go that bounces off of the original's foundation and is a new avenue of the toy lifespan that we've yet to see in universe. But that doesn't necessarily mean the whole film is a secret goldmine. You'll see. With us opening up to the world of factory origins and recalls, all sorts of other broken toys would join the roster and be the target for a whole rescuing coup at this Taiwanese factory. That's still not quite getting around my head. Some of these new characters, which of course never got to see the real light of day, include a Pez dispenser called Jujubee, which I really genuinely cannot understand the purpose of their name. But okay, really pushing the boundary for what's a toy, I guess. I mean, did it have a face? Was it one of those object toys? We'll never really know. There's a handful of character sketches and maybe this Don BB was the thing, but man, I can't tell. There was also said to be a, quote, sexy action figure called Cindy Scissors, which at first put me through a whole real rabbit hole of looking to how that would actually translate in a Disney movie, but there's sketches of her too, so my eyes can go to rest. But at least now we can confirm that it's keeping at least the Pixar standard of how they design their mum characters. Even still, along with kidnapping Pixar's intellectual property, they were also planning to just full-on rob you of your childhood as well. I would have figured the whole Barbie element from Toy Story 2 kind of covered this whole front well enough, you know? This is perfectly kid-friendly in concept, but with a couple of male characters clearly being intrigued, and with it being them hosting a beach party, you'd think that'd be enough to kind of highlight the idea. Plus, involving Barbie as a character, of course, allows for way more exploration later on from a story front. I mean, it just seems like we've got enough. So adding a sexualized character name pun like Cindy Scissors just seems excessive. Whatever the spin on it, it'd be a little jarring to have in such a kids movie if sexy was literally their first character trait given for her. There's also a mention of a third character here described as a Linda Hamilton-esque toy called Jade, who seems to fit the description of a female G.I. Joe type person considering the connection to Sarah Connor from the Terminator movies. But with our mentioned new characters being a badass female, a sexualized one, and a living Pez dispenser, I can't really say that these new characters would bring too much to the Toy Story universe. But there is actually more to mention. Alongside more designs of Don BB, there's Handy Hans that looks like a giant safety hazard, Mini RC, which we already have as a character in the films, a mariachi donkey, an apologetic plush bear, and Rosie, who is more prominent in the script, who we'll see more of later on. And then the other elephant in the room, Dax Blaster.
Oh, another member of Star Command and Buzz's non-malfunctioning replacement. Now that's some of the characters touched on, but what's worse than some of the concepts behind this alternate sequel is the business kerfuffle that was happening underneath it too. Obviously every Toy Story movie is to have a Woody in it, right? Well, this version still had the character of Woody, yes, but Tom Hanks himself? Nope. They would have completely recast him. Similarly, there was John Ratzenberger, who has appeared in every single Pixar film ever. He's Ham the Piggy Bank in the Toy Story series, and yeah, he too would have been recast as he was only willing to participate in it if it was done under Pixar's wing. Oh, dramatic stuff, and probably a big old doomed note on top of it without having Tom Hanks in it, you know? But with that brief detour out of the way, there's like a million more images to go through, and we actually have a good plot description that tells plenty of detail. So let's open up this portal more into alternate timeline 2004. Well, last time Andy went to cowboy camp for the duration of the film, this time Andy's off again to live like it's the 1700s, and his family go along with him. And as Buzz is trying to show off after hearing about Dax's existence, he malfunctions with badly timed wings and a projectile hand that leads him to getting sucked into a vacuum cleaner. With him hesitant to address the issue, the others chuck him into a box and send him off in the mail, only to realize that the whole Buzz line is now being recalled, prompting Woody, Jesse, Bullseye Ham, Rex, Slinky, and Mr. Potato Head to tail him in a fast shipping box this time. Literally the gang of number 2, but with a cast of 7 over 5. Because that's not going to be messy to script at all. Though apparently they did hark back to Jesse being afraid of the darkness, so they're keeping the character traits real. Alright. Anyway, in this reality, Buzz is branded with a red R on his neck. Oh, okay, apparently it's just a tag necklace. That's a lot nicer, so alright. And he's put on a conveyor belt leading to the Smasher, pulverizing toys and using a magnet to grab valuable metallic parts. Oof, who needs an incinerator, right? He saves himself, I guess, avoiding the workers' gaze, and tries to save others on another conveyor belt, though they're fine since they're being repaired. The red R means recalled. Meanwhile, the others arrive in Taiwan and have to navigate the marketplace, which, you know, fair enough. We've seen the arcades, the toy shop, the fair, whatever, but the actual script sequence gets a little odd in places. It's time for our first sketchy script description. Sure, maybe the sexualized Cindy Scissors was a bit tongue-in-cheek, but in this version, Woody's change in voice box leads him to communicate with Chinese toys with a very outdated take of a foreign accent. The idea of talking to foreign toys is actually a little intriguing, but I can assure you this isn't the right way to approach it, and there's more of these kind of oddities to appear. It's not a good look. So Buzz is found and placed in a conference room with Dax Blastar and his sidekick Comet. I couldn't find any pictures of Comet, though they're apparently starstruck from meeting the best-selling toy in the company's history. Cool. And there, the humans tell of how every Buzz owner will get $10 off a new Dax Blastar, and that they're announcing it at a big unveiling party. And with that deadline, Buzz is taken into the archive room, where they keep one of each toy they recalled. Kinda like the same prison setup from the real Toy Story 3, huh? Here, Buzz meets Cozy Rosie, a doll who was designed to keep kids warm at night but ended up catching on fire, and Jade as well, a Barbie-like doll whose knee can accidentally expose a sharp piece of metal. Yeesh. Buzz can scratch kids with his projectile hand accidentally, and does to Andy early on, but it's nothing on this. Anyway, no one really tries to escape except for a walkie-talkie named Shorty, who's found by a worker and placed on a conveyor belt only to be crushed by the Smasher, surprising everybody but Buzz, who tried to warn them. This is a whole new thing going on, and Jade says it would never happen under the former CEO, Old Man Kagoi, who's apparently being left in the dark by the other executives. The plan is now to get the memo about the toy destruction into Kagoi's hands. Okay, interesting, but alright. The main toy gang, meanwhile, discover that after some antics again, they're heading to Taipei 101, the tallest building in the world. Or at least it was between 2004 and 2010. Huh, that's when the real Toy Story 3 came out. Wow. Anyway, it's time for another round of sketchy script description. This time with the tone of the archive room. What could the toys possibly be doing wrong now? Well, opposite Buzz's cell is Spike the dog. How generic of a name. He's playing poker.
Yeah, I get it, yeah.
With a pair of, quote, hot paper dolls in varying stages of undress.
Wait, you lost me.
winning and getting them to undress more before Buzz's hand projects onto the game. Alright. Buzz then goes to escape, clashes with Jade, and third sketchy script description of the episode, he semi-swears at her. What a great way to pay homage to his titular catchphrase from the originals. What a great way to keep the spirit of the series going. Anyway, Jade and Rosie now join him on the move, and the toy gang are dropped off at a daycare center and abused. Again, actually coming back in the real thing. Is this really a coincidence? Some antics ensue with Jade and Buzz being diapered and having baby doll faces painted on them, and Bullseye is made up like a My Little Pony, and Potato Head is stripped and treated like a potato, but there's a forced wedding apparently. And there's also a general tone of the toy gang being angry at Woody's leadership, but it goes nowhere in the whole script, and he's rarely in the wrong anyway. So even from an actual critical thematic sense, this is clearly either an early draft or just not that well put together. But they do see the big Buzz Lightyear billboard and set up a flying device with a toy shopping cart, Mylar balloons, and a bubble machine. I do like this next bit too. Apparently they float past the Taiwanese equivalent of Times Square but swerve around some power lines, which ends up with them dangling from a building as Rex grabs a security camera and ends up being broadcast on one of the screens in the square. How very in character, I can practically hear that scene in my head. I don't know the implications of being seen for everyone on TV though. So Buzz continues his journey, getting weaker and weaker thanks to his malfunctioning chip, and we get some backstory. Rosie never had a kid, being recalled before hitting shelves, and Jade almost had a kid, being chosen by one, but the cashier rejected the sale when recognizing the recall. And while most Jades were repaired, she was the one kept for the archive room, hence why she is so edgy. And with them needing to go up 5 floors, and clearly Buzz can't do that because he's apparently dying, they cause a fire through Rosie and use the now emptied elevator to avoid all the people. They reach the conference room to grab the memo, and Dax joins in, only for him to betray them in his moment of glory. Obviously, he's like the great replacement now. Also, he's a Transformer type guy, being a vehicle as well. The toy gang reaches the factory loading dock where they see loads of Buzzes, but none of them theirs. The real Buzz is in the pneumatic tubing system flying overhead that luckily everyone just magically sees in the moment with a billion Buzzes in the room. And Dax appears too. It's time for a conflict. Though it is another conveyor sequence that we've seen a handful of times in Pixar's films. Dax gets Buzz's group onto the Smashers path, whom the other toys go to save, except Buzz and Woody get pinned by clamps. Buzz wiggles out, but Woody doesn't, saying to leave him in a moment that's a bit overdramatic and out of nowhere and leads to absolutely nothing anyway. Buzz saves him, but gets his leg now stuck and swings out to the side as the Smasher pulverizes just his leg. Jeez, that's a bit of an extreme, but it does lead to this incredibly dark concept art of Woody mourning a lifeless Buzz. I don't know why he's lifeless, it was just his leg, I guess from the pain? Ugh. Still, he comes back disorientated, and we learn that if his chip goes, he'll lose all of his memories. So it's time for an operation. I guess almost a Toy Story foreshadowing too, huh? He's fixed in the parts department, but factory reset until they mention Andy and the story of Jade and Rosie, which brings back all of his memories. Revived, they work on getting the memo to Kagoi so all recalled toys can be fixed, and they reach his office when Rosie accidentally burns it away. And then things get really weird. So Kagoi catches them in his office and talks to them while they are inanimate. Then he asks them to really talk to him, and breaking all rules of the Toy Story universe, kinda. Buzz then talks to him for real and tells him everything, like this esteemed toy maker understands the living element of the toys he's created. This is both a terrible idea and a fantastic one. However you want to spin it, it would explain his disgust for destroying toys, but man, oh man, what a fan fiction. Kagoi vows to fix every broken toy and races to the Dax Blastar party, inserting his news and bringing out a new fleet of Lightyears, now driving a brand new space rover. Angered and de-pedestaled, Dax then angrily chases Buzz and they all escape for the shipping dock back home that's also been running out of time throughout this whole film. Dax powers up the manufacturing line and creates dozens of Dax Blastars, and Buzz crashes mid-chase from avoiding boxes of the recalled Buzzes from before. It's finale sequence time, and it seems to be awfully action-packed too, being an all-out war between dozens of Buzzes and dozens of Daxes. I love that kind of concept in mind. There's no concept art of it, but man, just the vision of that is mwah. Though a great joke halfway through does pop up with the janitor popping in, causing everyone to flop to the floor, and then they leave not wanting to deal with all of this mess, resuming the fight. I mean, honestly, I kinda love that gag. Our versions of the two continue their chase, now with the Space Rover versus the Transformer motorbike thing that Dax is. Meanwhile, the toy gang are ahead prepping the box for shipping, though it has Andy's old address and they have to restart. And with one successful expansion of his wings this time, no more malfunctioning like the beginning, Buzz sends Dax off into the old box with Woody relabeling it to the address of Sid's house. What a great callback, honestly. Though, wasn't he thwarted and stopped doing what he did last time? Anyway, tied loose ends, Jade gives Buzz a kiss because Toy Story 2 isn't sacred anymore, and Andy is none the wiser. Not really the big thematic ending of the real Toy Story 3, but an okay kind of filler episode. Very Toy Story 2-y, and definitely fitting for the direct-to-video approach that they had planned. But there's all sorts of glaring issues in it too. As another sketchy script description I missed from before, apparently when apologizing to Woody for his distrust in him as a leader that still didn't really go anywhere, there was no disobedience and no actual splitting from the group or anything, Mr. Potato Head goes on to ramble about how his wife's gonna tear him a new storage compartment and forgetting to clear his internet history and how he's still smoking his old pipe and photos that he took of Mistress Potato Head, and I mean it's all just too much information and definitely not gonna go over kids' heads at this point. Oh, no thank you. But then there's other parts that are genuinely intriguing, like how it opens up with a chase sequence of a criminal ham and potato head that also comes to be in some capacity in the real thing, and the exploration of broken toys and maybe this element of talking to humans. It went in interesting directions, and I like some of these jokes. But overall, this was a cash grab of a film that touched on some good points, but comes off as problematic now and is nothing in the face of what we actually got. And thankfully, that's the timeline we're actually in, as the CEO of Disney, Michael Eisner, stepped down in early 2005 and Robert Iger took over. With his head screwed on right, he then had Disney purchase Pixar for $7.4 billion, and now that they were combined, they could focus on what was most important, creating innovative stories, characters, and films that delight millions of people around the world. And Circle 7 Animation was officially closed down in May 2006, with most employees brought into Walt Disney Animation Studios. A happy ending for all, and a sigh of relief that we're not truly in the absolute worst timeline. And though nothing really came to fruition, for a brief amount of time, they got their greasy fingers on Toy Story, Finding Nemo and Monsters Inc., and what truly scares me is the possibility that they would have had The Incredibles as something Disney held the rights for. Blech. Not for me, thanks. That would have been a childhood ruined. So Pixar lives on, and Pixart was dissolved, but maybe next month we'll return to this dark old time to cover the other two scrapped reinterpretations. Another day, another cancelled film project to talk about. Honestly, the more I look, the more I find scraps leaking out practically everywhere. But so far in the series, we've already started looking at the dramatic disaster piece that was Pixar's business turns in the mid-2000s, so let's continue that a little further. If you're not aware, last time we covered the cancelled Toy Story sequel, set to be the original Toy Story 3 back in 2004. And the reason we started there first is because it simply had the most information about it. And so I was planning to bolt together the other two scrap projects from that period, but as I started researching into the video, I've discovered that there's actually way more details to talk about here. I'm talking 103 pages of reading, kind of way more. So let's not diddle-daddle any longer and talk about another hint of a darker timeline we could have felt 15 years ago, the cancelled Finding Nemo sequel. Now, if you haven't seen our Toy Story video and haven't already left since it was last mentioned, then I'll briefly catch you up on the context. Back in 2004, Disney and Pixar had a falling out and split ways. But Disney owned the rights to Pixar's characters and decided to start production on their own sequels without Pixar in the picture. Pixart was their nickname, though they officially went by Disney Circle 7 Animation. Anyway, during this time, 3 sequels were started: Toy Story, Finding Nemo, Nemo and Monsters Inc., each at varying stages of progression. We'll cover Monsters Inc. one day, but for Finding Nemo, they actually made the least progress. And this is clear by the fact that there is not a single piece of concept art drawn up for the project. No locations, characters, storyboards, anything. Hence why our thumbnail was one made by my girlfriend again. But the reason we're talking about it as if we do have so much information about it is because we do, very directly. The entire 103-page script is available to read in full and hear every story be planned in at least one draft of the full runtime. I'll link it in the description if you want to check it out if I remember, but with that in mind, let's delve into just how this sequel was originally planned to go. Now, obviously, this came before Finding Dory, but do note it was created by entirely different people, so when the project fell apart, all these ideas were concretely scrapped and did not inspire Dory at all. Maybe, we'll come back to this in a moment. But we do know precisely who wrote the script. It was done by Laurie Craig, previously working on Paulie and Ella Enchanted at the time, as well as Ramona and Beezus and Rio 2 since then. As for the directions of this new Nemo rendition, it's interesting. While Finding Dory is all about the adventures and inner struggle of Dory coming to terms with her short-term memory loss and symbolically finding herself and her family, the sequel to Finding Nemo here was set to be named Finding Nemo 2. Bold. Though actually, the story isn't at all about finding Nemo again. He isn't even captured again, technically. No, rather it's a whole role reversal with, okay, you know what, let's just tackle things in chronological order. It kind of catches up to you fast. There's a lot more to this story than just fish napping this time around. I'll try my best to represent the ideas of the film in the format of the footage of the films we do have. Whatever's best to keep up the kind of imagery they're going for, you know? There's an attempt. So picture this. We start off in the opening sequence of the first film again, but now at a different angle. Everything plays out the same, but there's one pivotal retcon being introduced. Nemo is the only surviving egg, right? He's an only child, and that's what provokes Marlin's helicopter parenting and further disadvantages Nemo with his little fin. Turns out, in this film, Nemo isn't an only child, and instead there was another egg survivor way further down. Marlin never spots it, and the egg is gently brushed away from the site, caught in a bottle and randomly plucked away by a tiger shark. Also, by the way, reading a Nemo script, I never realized how little I knew marine creatures. I know sharks, but what's a tiger shark? Oh, it's that one. Good to know. Okay, bit weird, but anyway, we'll continue. The egg goes on a miniature little journey until it ends up in another nest filled with fellow yellowfish eggs this time. The prologue has been set. We now skip to after the events of the first film, where the new character conflict has Nemo being big-headed after his adventure, and Marlin is concerned over his parenting for being too protective and allowing Nemo to be so cocky. Meanwhile, Dory goes for a wander and discovers a lost bottlenose dolphin with a tracker on its fin from a place called Planet Blue, though neither of them recognize it's a tracker. But in the conversation, Dory does go on to randomly spout that bottlenose dolphins do have well-defined home ranges, and they are highly skilled echolocators, producing a range of clicking sounds in different frequencies. It is something they are both stunned she knows details of. That kind of comes up in Finding Dory. Weird. Anyway, as Nemo moves on, something else is stalking him, but he notices it. He comes up to an archway before confronting his stalker, another clownfish kid. They have a standard mirror sequence together where they're exactly identical, apart from Nemo's lucky fin. Oh yeah, so just randomly in the middle of this morning, it's Nemo's long-lost brother that shows up. Described here as seeming older, his cheeks leaner, face grown a little more handsome, he has more swagger and more attitude than Nemo, apparently. We took some artistic liberties over here with an eye patch. Oh, also in our imagination, he has rat ears because his name is, no joke, Remy. I guess Pixar literally just recycled the name not 3 years later, max. Huh. So Remy here managed to find them all after hearing about their big journey and hearing about scattered eggs. I don't remember when that was in the... Alright. And tells of how he survived by being raised by a clan of fighting firefish. That's the direction for the new Finding Nemo. Anyway, Remy boasts that he can win any fight in 3 deadly moves, so as expected, Remy is now integrated with the group, reunited with his father, and they go and play catch with a pebble, because apparently Toy Story 2 scene just wasn't enough to scratch that itch already. And yeah, a bit of a sibling rivalry also starts to brew here, with Remy knocking down Nemo in a sports game, and Nemo successfully answering a question in Mr. Ray's class that Remy couldn't. Everyone close to Nemo seems to prefer Remy, and it's kind of like a prince dethroned, as they describe it, and Nemo's bad fin especially makes him feel inferior. So to keep the story going now, tomorrow is a very special day because it's Nemo's birthday. Well, except, I guess it's Remy's birthday too, of course. Neither of them are happy on the day though, with Marlin failing to sufficiently support either of them. When split between Nemo's preferred game of choice and Remy's, Marlin votes to go with Remy's first, causing Nemo to storm off in a grump. It's, you know, your family drama type. Everybody's stressed. Marlin even goes on to say about his parenting, "Really? Because I don't feel like I'm doing fine. I feel like I need a drink. Do fish drink? I know last time we had the whole recurring gag with sketchy script descriptions, but honestly, Laurie's writing for this script is pretty tasteful, and a whole lot less, pubescent, shall we say. But hey, there's somewhat of an adult joke for you. So Nemo and Remy fight, Marlin crashes in to break it up, and now Remy goes off on a strop, shouting at Marlin for abandoning him in the first place. It seems like your standard family drama so far, right? A little out of left field considering the prologue retcon, but it's expansive, sure, alright. Here's where a whole extra layer of plot comes in that's not really needed, but I guess you gotta stick with the formula, I guess. So now, that dolphin from before makes a reappearance being chased by a butt. They never actually say, they don't call back to it, but I'm gonna do it for them. The dolphin is netted and Remy is caught in the swing, only for Marlin to push Remy out of the way and take his place. This is a Finding Marlin story, though that title doesn't really roll off the tongue, does it? So Dory arrives on the scene and is caught up on events where she knows she has helpful information, and hey, actually it is a bit of a dodgy script piece. Dory is trying to remember details through a rhyming trick that Mr. Ray taught her, babbling all of this. Wait, stop talking. I have to remember it. It's a rhyme. It rhymes with bowling shoe, oyster shoe, wandering Jew. I can't really imagine those words coming out of Dory's mouth, but alright. Also cheese fondue. Eventually she remembers it's Planet Blue. That's where the dolphin stalkers are from. And so the 3 head off for a rescue. As for Marlin and the dolphin, they end up at Planet Blue, and it's a large-scale marine park. Sound kind of familiar? It's not exactly an aquarium marine hospital park, but I'm getting awfully familiar vibes from the location of Finding Dory. Actually, this is also part aquarium. We sure this is a good coincidence from Pixar? Still, instead of being plonked into some kind of storage room, Marlin is never noticed and ends up in the dolphin exhibit, where it's actually a dolphin performance show. The dolphins are all theatre kids, one's particularly Shakespearean, like that one toy from the real Toy Story 3. Here's another slightly dodgy script piece. Marlin's freaking out. "What were you talking about? We were just in the ocean. We were caught by a net. Geez, I can't believe I'm this unlucky." To which one dolphin replies, "Hey, nets happen." Maybe I'm reading that too much, but it sounds like a sly adult gag to me, you know? Nets happen? Anyway. So with Marlin a fish out of ocean water, the dolphins perform. They're jumping through hoops, there's chorus lines, directors singing, everything, and Marlin can do nothing but watch the wacky cacophony. Meanwhile, apparently not that far away, Nemo, Remy, and Dory are next seen making it to the coastline of the place. So much for the ocean-sized adventure that they had beforehand. Finding Dory at least touches on the turtle transportation and some danger along the way. Nemo too just pops them into existence here. Still, they've got to work out a way inside. Here's an extract for you. Dory goes on to say, that's a very good question. If we could just get the ocean levels to rise. We need some global warming. Anybody got a match? Meanwhile, Remy and Nemo come up with opposing strategic plans. Remy dives into action towards a dangerous propeller, kinda similar to the filter in the original film, that succeeded only thanks to the luck of a branch coming in and jamming the thing as they attempt it. And in the next segment, Nemo tries to swim upstream against a strong current onwards, but fails, feeling humiliated. Remy is reckless, and Nemo always hesitantly thinks instead. Opposites, you see. So who's here to help out but another callback to the first film that doesn't appear in the plot for Finding Dory? Gil! Just him though. Apparently the company went their different ways. He hears their story and is skeptical to help since Planet Blue is all tanks and he hates tanks. Also, Dory's apparently been here before. Quote, "It's hard to explain, but I think I've been there before." No fish has ever come out of it. but maybe she did and she just forgot. Yeah, I forget a lot, Will. It's Gil. So Gil is guilted into helping out, where he explains that there are in and out pipes and they need to switch them round by clogging the flow. But Gil's got assistance in yet another coincidence from Finding Dory: sea lions. Lazy ones, because the abundance of human food has made them so. And while they do still hang out on a rock in the sun, their character traits are that they are always sleepy and unmotivated this time. But for this one time, the lions work together to steal a parasail and jam up the intake pipe, allowing the gang to move through the outward pipe. The three have a moment of shouting echo in the pipe, not unlike that scene from The Incredibles, and hey, just like Finding Dory, they come across an octopus after the pipe, though this one is a silent enemy tangling around tentacles and at one point getting duped into shaking his own hand and then throwing them off in frustration. I like that. And eventually they end up right by the dolphin exhibit. Nemo says, "I hope Dad's okay," to which Dory replies, "Oh, you know your father. Cool in a crisis." Marlin, meanwhile, is trying to get the dolphin's attention mid-performance, and they eventually help him by lobbing him out with their tails and into a bucket that a janitor takes away. Meanwhile, the humans have just started working on the parasail clogging job. Dory, Remy, and Nemo make it to the dolphins, but Marlin is long gone somewhere. Marlin on his journey though gets to witness the horrors that is the kitchen fish prep and ends up in the polar bear pool, something we don't actually see in the legitimate Nemo series. And while Marlin should be very dead here, he meets a bullied polar bear called Blanca who's more neurotic than he is, who befriends and then protects him instead. Talk about lucky. Meanwhile, back at Nemo and Remy, they dash in opposite directions with their own plans, only for Dory to be stuck in the middle and then gets netted by the staff. What follows is actually a really interesting sequence of the boys escaping the next netting attempt. The dolphins reprise their performance, but now aiming to disrupt the workers and sabotage the attempt. Staff are splashed and hit and dunked into the water as the boys dash into another pipe to take them to the polar bear exhibit, and the audience are loving it the whole way through. But at the same time, the humans are working on that parasail problem, and just as they succeed their escape, the flow is reintegrated and they're flushed in the complete wrong direction. Oops. But all of that sounds like a fantastic sequence to watch. They end up in an abandoned remodeling Pirate Cove aquarium, both bonding on their mutual seasickness. Also, with the flow now working, the polar pool is getting progressively cooler. We also learn that Blanca is being bullied for being a bear from Cleveland and not the Arctic, as well as being uncoordinated. Funny how Cleveland pops up again in script in Finding Dory. Investigating separately, Remy chats to a clam and crab who tell him to look out for himself, and he does so, finding an exit pipe and taking it without Nemo, though Nemo spots him and wallops him in the face for it. Undisturbed sibling fighting, you know? Remy flees, almost crying, and is confronted by a massive sea snake next. Danger time. Nemo watches from the sidelines, advising Remy to use his 3 deadly moves, but he's frozen in place. So Nemo crashes in to distract, the snake thinks they're seeing double, because obviously they're the same fish, they're both chased through the pipelines and end up in a new exhibit we've also seen in Finding Dory, the petting zone. Though now it's outside and more like a gentle, grabby inconvenience than Toy Story 3 version 2, you know? Also, for another callback, the mine seagulls all appear here too. Still in chase, the snake then bursts from the pipes, to which the seagulls pull back and say, "Yours?" I'll admit, that probably make me chuckle in the cinema, like just one turning to the other like that. Anyway, chaos. The kids run, the seagulls scatter, and staff leap on over to net the snake. And with the danger gone, Remy is shivering. Apparently his punch wound is infected. A little out of nowhere, but alright. Remy is netted in his vulnerable state and Nemo jumps in with him. They're dropped in a dark isolation tank with human hands and antibiotics, though they don't actually know this is good news. And remember Gil? Yeah, he's been trying to motivate the sea lions to clog the pipes again the second time all the way through this moment. Finally succeeding only now by getting them to bark incessantly or something. Inspired, they swipe life vests, barbecue grills, and fishing tackle. They look like they're starting to wake up and move with a new sense of purpose. And hey, this isn't exactly a sketchy script description, but it is unexpected. Wanna know what Marlin's up to? He's growing attached to the polar bear. Do you ever wonder if we had met in another place, another time? Sure, I don't know where that would be exactly. Blanca, my heart is with my boys. Can we talk about something else? This series doesn't really cover romance much, it's not the point, but a clownfish and a polar bear certainly seems extreme to me, you know? Anyway, by this point, Remy's infection has him delirious, spouting out his real thoughts to Nemo. "I wasn't raised by fighting fish, I was raised by weed fish, hundreds of them, too many mouths to feed. I never fit in. That's why I came looking for..." He's all I have. Didn't know the father's name was Huh, but there you go. That was a dumb joke. It's not even in the script. Why did I say that? It's the heart-to-heart moment, with Nemo comforting Remy as he swats at nothing. Then the timeline gets a little weird. For Marlin, it starts snowing and he's getting chilly, but then we come back to Remy and Nemo again, who have apparently been sleeping overnight. They talk about last night anyway. Maybe they're just disorientated. Either way, they're now bagged with Remy feeling better and dropped in the coral tank. This is gonna sound awfully familiar. The tank is at least 2 stories tall and filled with all sorts of coral and familiar looking reef fish. This is almost to a T the kind of tank from Finding Dory and her home. And what do you know, Dory is here. And she leads them both to her family. Not a couple of parents this time, but to a school of 50 blue tank fish. This is also where Dory learned to read, just like in the canon film. The 3 catch up, though Remy admits his injury came from Nemo, and it's something that Nemo appreciates, and Dory's siblings tell that Dory was also adventurous and just had to see the ocean, apparently. There's a bit of backstory for you. Marlin is shivering like crazy, cradled in Blanca's fur belly that reminds him of the anemone tentacles from back home. And the Nemo gang's next plan now is to jump into the protein skimmer as it's being replaced in the tank. It's a system not too unlike the tank filter from the first film, honestly. But Dory is torn on staying at home with her family or sticking with her newfound family instead. And last minute, she joins Nemo in the leap to the filter. With Marlin on the edge of death, Blanca makes a new move, creating a ladder out of the exhibit environment, climbing along the border and escaping from up high, something miraculous for her coordination. She bursts out with Marlin in a bucket out onto the amusement park grounds. Panic. Civilians scatter, staff tail her, and she's dodging a barrage of tranquilizer shots. She makes it towards a pond before being hit last minute. Marlin dryly struggles between the two, with a last interaction of Marlin gasping, "Thank you, I'll never forget you," and Blanca drowsily muttering, "Goodbye, Marlin, I love you." Wrapping up that wholesome, yet still kinda weird romantic plot. Gil, meanwhile, has clogged that pipe fully, though a human diver has now come to investigate, so how else to solve the problem than with a Deus Ex Machina callback that we didn't get in Finding Dory, with the reappearance of none other than Bruce, with his titular
"Hello."
The diver, quote, "gets the hell out of there." The Nemo gang's plan is a success and they're dropped somewhere murky. It's tense, practically nothing can be seen in the distance, and someone's approaching. It's Marlin. They all hug in reunion, though Remy feels left out. He runs off, barely legible from the murk, but Nemo is the one to come to comfort him. And Marlin appears to say, "Look, I may be new at this, and maybe I'm not very good at it yet, but I can handle it, whatever comes our way. But I think love is like snow." They look at him confused. There's always more when you need it. Something Blanca said to him in the polar exhibit. "I should have found you. I'm sorry I didn't. Come home with us now, Remy." And though it's happy family time, the adventure isn't actually over just yet, as the humans have a counter to the shark problem, firing up the Super Pumper. As the group head through the pond's exit pipes, emergency valves begin slamming shut. They have to escape back where they came from quickly. Everyone makes a bolt back, and Dory's so involved in the moment that she whacks her head on escape. And hey, if the premise of a long-lost brother or a polar bear romance or all the strange Dory parallels wasn't enough weirdness, here's a whole new spanner in the works. From that head bump, Dory then goes on to entirely remember everything. Her short-term memory loss is cured in this script. I personally don't like that decision and much prefer the route that Finding Dory took, but let's see where this revelation takes us. She remembers how she first lost her memory from bumping her head on her way out the first time, and now knows perfectly how to get out from here. So they come to yet another exhibit, and one we haven't seen in Dory, the Flamingo exhibit. The group have to dart across the waters, dodging the poking beaks as they go along, and of course Dory has the perfect memory to command them all when and where to weave throughout the whole sprint. And to fly out of the park's borders without the use of the flowing pipes, they must ride, believe it or not, the water ride for humans that's been on site at the amusement park. It's actually kind of cool because they kept showing it in the background and mentioning it in the script, so it was actually established. But anyway, seems like a Toy Story kind of action sequence to me, honestly. Everyone is hesitantly scared, but they go for it anyway, being hoisted up by a water wheel system where Dory then remembers it was here she was whacked by the water ride sliding down and hitting her on the head. So what's the solution this time to avoid the inevitable hurt? There isn't one. They all just let it happen again. No, really. Ouch. The crash sends them all flying, and of course a camera catches them mid-air for a little gag. They end up in some river rapids and out to a calm bay, briefly thinking Remy's missing, but he's not. They've made it across the border. They wave off Gil and the sea lions, and they serenade back in howling barks that motivates them, but it rattles Gil. He's created a musical monster, apparently. I can't tell if Dory loses her memory again, because she seems to do a fake out with it, but then continues to be her normal ditzy self, so I don't know. As a family of 4, they venture off into the deep back home, bickering like any family does on a long-distance car trip. And that's the end. Honestly, that wasn't terrible. It's certainly not the dated Toy Story 3 script. It relies a whole lot more on random callbacks for fan service reason and doesn't have that modern comedic twang that the real Finding Dory has because of the year difference, of course, but I don't absolutely hate it. I tell you what though, the amount of recurring elements that did actually end up in the final Finding Dory makes me supremely skeptical that Pixar didn't read and pluck pieces they liked. I mean, sure, I can see the octopus being a cool coincidence, but Aquarium Park, Coral Tank, Dory's family learning to read here, sea lions on a rock, the petting zone? Sure, I guess with marine life you are kind of limited to what kind of stories can be told, but there's just so many going on here. I don't know. Now, as much as I did enjoy this alternative reality of a Finding Nemo sequel, you still gotta admit, it pales in comparison to Finding Dory, which is fair. Not only is this an earlier stage of development, but Pixar had all sorts of formulaic goodness to boost up their stories in their later years. We may all kinda dig on it now, but Pixar's trope of trying to make the audiences cry makes for good storytelling. And with us having such a baby-faced Dory and the whole Shell story with her parents, it's way better than the generic trials of just a new brother in the mix, throwing things off. And the fact that Marlin is stolen doesn't really add too much other than an adventure to grow closer during. In fact, that whole element really wasn't all that necessary. It's just a formula thing. Remy is the enticing new addition to this film after all, but it seems difficult to juggle anyway. That being said, I liked the fan service and subversions we did see. I'd love to see that octopus and dolphin sequence, but I guess considering all the other baggage that would come with the Circle 7 animation team, I'm more than happy to be in this reality here. It's not always perfect, as this last year has shown, but things get better, and we could be doing a whole lot worse for ourselves. Disney Circle 7 Animation. If you've seen our previous videos, you would know that this is the company assigned by Disney with the sole purpose of creating Pixar sequels. Disney and Pixar had a business disagreement that made them split ways, and Disney owned the rights to most of their IPs, and so they could just do whatever they wanted. They had their greedy eyes on their own version of Toy Story 3, Finding Nemo 2, Finding Marlin, Finding Remy, however you want to colloquialize it, and as we're here to discuss today, Monsters Inc. 2, Lost in Scaradise. The pun doesn't really work with a British accent, but whatever. Now, these productions were all at varying stages of production. Toy Story had been all plotted out with concept art and the whole script pinned down. Finding Nemo had no concept art, but the entire script was written and is available to read online. Monsters Inc. is somewhere in the middle. It has the least content for us to actually break down, not having any kind of script online for us to digest, and having like 6 images to go through. So to provide a bit more content for you, we'll be meshing this old sequel idea with a new one. There is a real Monsters Inc. sequel in production. It's not a movie or anything like that, but it's a spin-off TV show releasing on Disney+, because, you know, they didn't reveal enough at that Disney investor event. One day I'll cover everything here. One day. So anyway, with all of that out of the way, let's get into things. Obviously, there already is a Monsters Inc. 2 in the form of the official Pixar prequel, Monsters University. This isn't that. The reign of Circle 7 was around 2004, and University was 2013. And with that in mind, Scaradise is not a prequel. Set just 1 year after the events of the first film, it's a direct continuation. The society of the monster world has now changed, with the revelation that child laughter is far more of a potent source of energy compared to their screams. But any kind of comedy beats aren't really the priority here. Instead, it's more about the relationship between Sully and Boo. Last time we saw that the two were still connected for a reunion every now and again, and Sully wants another after the special bond he procured in the first film. It's now come around to Boo's birthday, and her door isn't as readily available as before, beyond the shredding it already experienced. It's been buried now into the archive.
archives. Still, they dive in to retrieve it, a little treat from Wazowski to Sullivan. Eager for the reunion, Sully's got a gift for Boo and they enter into her room, only to find that Boo is no longer there. Instead, a sleeping granny takes her place. Boo has moved on somewhere, moving out and away from their reach. And despite the consequences of their upcoming actions, the two then go out on an adventure into the real human world in the hopes of tracking her down. This isn't too bad of a concept. It's interesting because the consensus of the real Toy Story 3 and Finding Dory to a slightly lesser extent is that they're both fairly top-tier productions. Monsters University isn't hailed quite so highly. In a lot of ways, it's pretty average, or at least certainly not one of Pixar's best. I personally watched it in cinemas and found most of it to be fairly forgettable, but there was one moment that did really stick out with me, and that has to be the whole sequence that took place within the human world. Seeing Mike and Sully against this dark, realistic world where their entire existence is a high-stakes secret was incredible. The way the two had to traverse around the humans or scare them with intimidation to keep their secret safe through distance was something that just seemed like the perfect step up for their world. And this film sounds like it could have tackled that element more overtly, if it was completed of course. So on that thought alone, I'm definitely on board, and depending on how they would have tackled it, maybe in some strange reality, this would have been the film that could top the official Pixar follow-up. We'll never know, but it's nice to think of. Now, since we're in the monster timeline of 1 year ahead of the first film, let's scoot this time zone to just 6 months after the first film, because this is the moment that the official Disney Plus spin-off makes its debut with Monsters at Work. The city of Monstropolis is making its transition to a laughter-fueled society, and a new monster has joined the Inc. team, Tyler Tuskman, a recent Scare major graduate from Monsters University. He works not as a scarer, even though that's a defunct career anyway, but actually as an engineer in the facilities team. Of course, the main duo still are prevalent in the series, as Tyler dreams of working alongside his idols Mike Wazowski and James P. Sully Sullivan. The series, of course, covers Tyler's adventures through the ranks and systems of the corporation, with all sorts of antics on the side, I'm sure. A side story in-universe to explore whatever they wish. It's pretty nice. The idea was supposedly first announced in 2017 by the CEO, and as production progressed, the current team working on this was supplied with all of the concept art for the original film, including all sorts of unused art. These would then be recycled into this new production to flesh it out further. Can't get any more faithful to the original image than that now, can you? And it's expansive too. I love it. Now, speaking of faithfulness, let's return to the less-so production again as we continue forward with Monsters Inc. 2, Lost in Scaradise. Still, like, I don't say paradise. Anyway. While there's little images left of the actual production, there are more explainable details that are relevant to the story. So, Wazowski and James are exploring out in the real world. We don't know if the adventure's a montage-style gravity sequence of the first film, or the grittier character-based self-exploration of the prequel, but what we do know is that the stakes would be heightened, presumably. Just from knowing the world of Monsters Inc., breaking the rules and set boundaries by going out into the human world is obviously forbidden and only for those banished. With the two doing as they do, they would surely have the CDA on their tail, as well as any other conflicts arising, like whether this journey is so worth it for Mike, who's probably leaving behind like all of his relationships for this voyage. However it's spun, it's likely this story would require a lot of sacrifice from the both of them, and this tension would cause a rift between the two of them. And even if they want to go back, some way or another, the two are gonna end up stuck in the human world, only stressing things out even more. According to the images we do have, at some point, the two would stop in their tracks and argue, and once at the other side of that uncomfortable conversation, the two would split ways, clearly having starkly different opinions on where to go from there. As for where each person goes, or what elements of the real world are explored, none of it is documented, or at least available for us right now. Instead, we have a jump away from the actual meat of the story and into the endgame story details that wrap the conclusion altogether, because it turns out all of the adventuring being done by Mike and Sully were all for nothing. A change in perspective for the entire function of Monsters Inc.'s mechanics is through the idea that the teleporting doors that the corporation uses are not attached to particular wardrobes and rooms as one would expect from what's already been established. Rather, they are intrinsically linked to the people on the other side. When Mike and Sully first breached into Boo's room at the beginning of the film, it wasn't her replacement of someone who's taken over her old house, it was Boo.
at an age much greater than intended. Some fans have broken down this idea more to assume that the reason the door was being archived in the first place in this film is because of age restrictions. If every door attaches to a person, then eventually they will pass their expiry date, and so shouldn't be used anymore in order to avoid both the leaking of the monster world as well as losing the efficiency of energy production, as they are no longer innocent children screaming into barrels. Monsters at Work is a production very far into its lifespan. That's a convoluted way for me to just say that it's nearly to be released. Originally, it was planned for a 2020 release date, but since that was never really going to happen, we're at the end of the year now, Monsters at Work is drafted to release on Disney Plus in early 2021 instead. More to that, it's sticking as close to the roots of the core franchise as much as possible, with every major voice actor reprising their role. John Goodman and Billy Crystal are back as Sully and Mike. John Ratzenberger, the ultimate Easter egg, returns as the Yeti, as do the characters of Roz, who now supposedly has a twin sister called Rose, and Celia May is back too. On top of that, there's a collection of newbies that join the ranks. Obviously, we've covered Tyler already, but there's also Millie Tuskman, his mum, Val Little, his best friend, Fritz, the scatterbrained boss, Duncan, a plumber who takes advantage of any opportunity he can seize, Cutter, who has no description, and another reappearance from Smitty and Needleman, the two guys who speak more like this. Oh no! You know, is that just me who remembers that? This is the only replacement cast option, as Dan Gerson is no longer with us, being replaced by Steven Stanton instead. Overall, it sounds to be a great reintroduction to the world and characters that we know, with a splash of originality in there too, and plenty of room to explore the world more. I mean, if the Yeti's returning, then presumably, you know, they're gonna go back there. Only other details I have to share on Monsters at Work now is that in February of this year, it was revealed that Stephen J. Anderson was part of the directing team for the series, previously working and directing Meet the Robinsons, a personal soft spot of mine, as well as supervising for all sorts of big-name Disney animations. With those last details of the TV series covered, let's finish up the conclusion of Scaradise. It still doesn't quite fit my accent. Anyway, while we've heard the production side of the Disney Plus show, for this one, we know of two names, Rob Muir and Bob Hilgenberg, both of which hired to write the script and storyboard it together, and both of which I struggle to find any notable IMDb page for. But there's one film that crosses over both vague names, Tinkerbell and the Great Fairy Rescue. I haven't seen it, or the others on these lists, but you get the idea. This would have been their big scale debut potentially, and who knows of the potential that they had. Anyway, the reason that Boo is so old is that it's revealed that the human world progresses through time at a much faster rate than the monster one. Surprising that the professionals had never really noticed that in all of their careers beforehand, and I guess that means that the Yeti is dead in this timeline, but it could allow for some sneaky foreshadowing in this film, with the two discovering new, more modern technologies or even futuristic stuff as they adventure through the lands. It could also explain how mythical creatures are prevalent in the past of humans, since they would appear so rarely between visits that concrete evidence would never really be found of them. And though this does open for a lot of options, it also breaches all sorts of questions. Working out the logic of this seriously complicates the premise a whole bunch more. But let's say this was an early draft of the idea and the nuances were yet to be ironed out. With all of the secrets revealed, it was time for one final reunion. Pixar nowadays are known for making you cry, and for once, Circle 7 Animation were kind of ahead of the curve. Much like the cliffhanger of the first film, Sully and Mike return to Boo's room where they see her in her aged state, strapped up to some hospital equipment. A bit extra dark and real to feature the equipment, but alright. Instead of snoring her head off, she's now awakened by the big furry silhouette, and for one final time in her life, she recognizes her furry blue friend, with a somber and scratchy Kitty? Whether we hear any more of the conversation doesn't really matter. This bittersweet goodbye was set to be the true ending of the Monsters, Inc. franchise. Really taking the Interstellar approach before Interstellar was made, huh? Maybe society was changed again, maybe there was a shift in power again, or a villain overthrown, or maybe it was just a character story and a heartbreaking goodbye. The door would presumably then be archived, never to be opened again. The fans' Pixar theory that the witch from Brave was an old Boo would disintegrate, but maybe a new one would pop up, like how this was all in Boo's head anyway, and her being at the end of her life meant her brain forced imaginary visions of her childhood or something. But at the end of the day, That's not the timeline we're in. Back in 2004, Pixar sequels weren't really a thing, with the exception of that one Toy Story film. But in today's landscape, in 2020 plus, we've got franchises brimming everywhere. I mean, Toy Story's also getting that whole new perspective shift film with the announcement of Lightyear, so who knows what future avenues that could brew. As well as obviously all sorts of originals as well. Just all the work ethic in the world is going on for Disney right now. But while for the fake Toy Story, things seemed like a noticeable downgrade in this alternate reality and Finding Nemo was around about the same, this film is debatable. Monsters University didn't blow too many minds, and this idea has a lot of complications to it, so whether you prefer this timeline of the Monsters series or the optional one we've just discussed, at the very least, there's more Monsters Inc. on the way with that 2021 Monsters at Work. I, for one, am very ready to see more Pixar content soon, but for now, we'll have to do a little more waiting in our reality. After a decent hiatus, I'm bringing it back. At least one more time. As more recently, more production news has popped up, of course. Well, I say recently, news of this movie were leaked by a 4chan user back in November of 2022, and somewhere along the line it was recommended to me via my Discord server. So thanks to Futaba Forever, Anzio Hall, and Sweaty Yeti for getting this attention to me. We've got a nice chunk of details to go through. But first, a mystery. When was this movie set to be released? When was it under production? We don't actually know. Details of the dates around this production are positively blurred, which is fascinating, right? There are some details, vague ones really. We'll get there in a mo. First, what even is this project? This is the cancelled Metro, created by Disney Toon Studios. This was set to be a Trains spin-off in the Cars universe. We got planes, so why not trains as well? Really gunning for that Thomas the Tank Engine and Tugs vibe. Now, we don't really have news over when this production officially started, as it was off the books. No public announcement of this movie was ever made, but we do know the history of Disney Toon Studios. They have popped up a handful of times in past cancelled episodes, but it's understandable if you've forgotten over the months. These guys are known for their direct-to-DVD sequels. Think, well, every 2 and 3 at the end of a Disney classic. Though that doesn't necessarily paint the full picture, as they are not at all bad. Sometimes they made equally investing sequel movies like Lilo and Stitch, Stitch Has a Glitch, Lion King 1.5, and an extremely Goofy movie, which they got to make because they are the guys behind a Goofy movie. This secondary Disney production team are also the people who made Planes 1 and 2. Suddenly Trains makes a lot more sense for them. They're not directly Pixar, but they are given the IPs to play around with some spin-off ideas on the side. So this didn't exactly come from nowhere. That being said, the studio also has a lot of cancelled productions under their belt as well. There was a point in 2007 when, during an executive reshuffle, John Lasseter was put in the position to destroy all projects currently being made, which wiped out sequels to Pinocchio, Dumbo, The Aristocats, Chicken Little, and Meet the Robinsons, all at once. And also, even their Planes franchise got its 3rd movie cancelled, Protect and Serve. Add that onto the one Cars Toon Tales from Radiator Springs episode, and that gives us 3 cancelled projects all tied to the Cars universe alone. They really want this thing to expand. Or don't. Anyway, while it's unsure exactly when this project started, we do have details about some of the people attached to create it. Most notably are the directors, Steve Loter and Sunil Hull. Now, if you don't recognize these names and faces, don't worry, I'm also pretty bad keeping with names despite doing so many of these. But you do know their work. Steve Loter, for a start, is a major director for all sorts of iconic nostalgic TV. He was the director for all of Kim Possible, as well as Buzz Lightyear of Star Command and American Dragon, all kind of the underrated cartoons of that era. Adored by those that saw it, but not seen by everybody, you know? And next to him at the table, you have Sunil Hall as co-director and head of story. Now, this guy is the creator behind The Mighty Ones recently, as well as directing the Monsters vs. Aliens TV series, being the storyboard artist to Gravity Falls, and having the both of them work on The Penguins of Madagascar, Snort About Mort. I clearly do not know the full scope of the Madagascar franchise. Still, these are the two at the top of this production, and both of them had some words to say about the project after being poked about it a little on Twitter and other sources. With Steve Loter describing the story as a cross between a specific Walter Hill film from the 70s and a specific Scorsese film from the 80s. That
is a weird prompt, but it tells us a heck of a lot of the format for this movie. See, the Walter Hill movie in question is The Warriors, and the Martin Scorsese film is After Hours. Here are their details to get a better understanding of how this Trains movie may have rolled out. The Warriors is a 1979 action thriller about gang members in New York City. Essentially, our protagonist gang squad, the Warriors, are framed for the murder of the most powerful gang leader and are on the run all the way back to their home territory on Coney Island as other gangs try to take them down mid-transit. They're run down by a modified school bus, they board an elevated train, there's a building fire on the tracks, they meet low hierarchical gangs while on foot, chased by police, board a subway car, brawl other gangs, there's an undercover cop at one point, they're lured in by a group and ambushed, reach their destination, fight the real murderer and win despite them bringing a gun. Their name is cleared and they end with In the City by Joe Walsh being played over the credits. Essentially, it's a chaotic, on the run through New York type story. After Hours, meanwhile, this one's a wild ride. It's all about one guy, Paul, who just finished after a boring day at work. He then goes on to meet someone called Marcy at a cafe, follow up their advice and goes to buy a paperweight at an apartment, taking a cab but losing their dollar bills to the wind. At the apartment is sculpture work, like one shape reminiscent to The Scream. They scarper out and attempt the subway home but can't afford it because the fares just went up at midnight. They go to a bar and learn that there are burglaries about. The bartender offers money for the subway but can't open the cash register, so gives Paul the key to go to their apartment to grab the keys to the cash register. Paul does so and witnesses a burglary, saving the sculpture he saw before, and then returns to the very first apartment. Then they see that Marcy has died and reports the death, then goes back to the bar, but it is locked and Paul has to wait another 30 minutes, where he goes to another girl's apartment and rejects her advances, goes back to the pub and a group of punks attempt to shave him a mohawk. Then there's an ice cream truck driver who mistakes him for the burglar because that girl from before that he rejected sketched a fake wanted poster framing him. He goes back to the club and asks a new girl to dance and for advice. She molds him into a papier-mâché sculpture in order to hide from the mob. The mob appears and then leaves because they don't spot him, and she then refuses to let him out, so he hardens into the sculpture looking like The Scream. Then the burglars come back, they steal him thinking that they're stealing the same sculpture from before, they drop him out of the back of their van in one sharp turn and Paul crashes out directly outside of the front gate of his office building at sunrise. Good morning, his computer screen says. We've come full circle. So just imagine all that, but with a train, and you're basically there. What a dark comedy. It sounds like some sort of Kafka production. From these two movies, you can very much sketch in a picture of the vibes. It's a chaotic New York, with our protagonist steaming from place to place, all across one eventful night. Sounds like a fun prompt. And what's more, there's a cheeky little creative choice that I think could have really elevated this movie. As quoted by Steve Loter, I can't talk too much about it, but I can tell you some fun facts. Most of the film would have been real time with no time jumps. We had full access working with the MTA, that's the Metropolitan Transportation Authority, they're responsible for the real public transport of New York City. It would have been great, he says. Yes, this whole 2-hour movie would have been across a direct 2 hours of story. That's a pretty intriguing idea, huh? As well as a cover of Stevie Wonder's Living in the City as the end credits song. I'd suggest listening to Living in the City for yourself, since I clearly can't play it here for copyright reasons, but I do have Living in the City from Sonic R, so that'll have to suffice. So with the foundation built about as best as it can be, let's do a direct dissection of the concept art, shall we? This was leaked anonymously in November of 2022 and subsequently deleted as a thread, but now it's archived on Lost Media Wikis. So let's consume. Starting off pretty simple, we have From the World Below Cars, Disney Metro. This is one of a few commercial images we have of the project, and it's pretty simplistic. No protagonist, no specifics, it's a teaser image, presumably telling us it's more so about the subway element than the overground, though I imagine we'll be getting a healthy dosage of both. Ironically, with nary a train in sight. Perhaps it's a link more to Cars, or because cars can be involved too if everyone goes underground anyway. Car parks and actually using the subway and all that. Is it like a steam line of Max? Cars within cars, but trains? I guess we'll see if the artwork will answer all of that. Next up, a pretty smug-looking chap. Yes, he is our protagonist, enjoying the life down under. It may be a little grimier with some graffiti as a defining trait, but it's beyond the cars. And an M on his forehead likely connects to both Metro and his actual name. I'll call him the Paul. Moving on to an action shot, it's an event of the film, pushed forwards by a bigger train, and judging by that face, it's not an accident. But Paul is under attack.
Oh, this is serious After Hours vibes. I thought this was like training at first, but no, this is a bar. Chief over here with another M on his head is serving drinks, while Mapool is surrounded by much bigger machines of all sorts of personalities. Look, that's Thomas's distant cousin back there. Where is his face? And look, their drinks are on little hand cars. And next shot gives us practically a town for trains, with a pawn shop, check cashing, and a place called Bent Rail. Though there are cars here too, I think that guy is an arm barrier. He seems to enjoy his job. And here it is in color. Same barrier again, and same face too, though maybe more malicious this time than before. Maybe they're a pest, always trying to pick on Mapool instead. He's not too happy as he returns to the Bent Rail anyway, and even big guys look a little judgingly. But this place is the bar, I imagine. See, they have oil on tap. More! We got boilerplates, signal, lager, I think the bartender greeting Mapool at the door, and a drunk carriage leaning up against an old schooler that legit just doesn't have a face. I thought maybe last time it was because they were at the back of the artwork, but no. There might just be trains with no faces in the Cars universe. Every installment breeds so many more questions. Oh wow, and now we're in the thick of it. I imagine this is several beats blended into one shot, passing by a train station, aiming for Canal Street with a specific time code to the real-time element. Gang members, down at the bottom, coming out of the world of Mad Max and bringing a clown along with them. Is it a clown gang and a punk gang? Or am I just reading a Twisted Metal reference out of this? You've also got the police getting involved alongside too many tires, car hairstyles, a truck of some product, and a giant van down here scraping up the lighting. And on the other side, it's paparazzi witnessing an assault. It's an ice cream truck, set alight and flying out the window. That's no coincidence. But do you think that's a future rival attacking Mapool, or the crime scene that pins Mapool in the first place? Fascinating all around, this piece of artwork. Here's an artsy shot of New York, bustling, yellow cabs, high rise, and down to some peace again. This shot feels a little more investigative, with Mapool and this cleaner cart checking out whatever's later down the tunnel. Ominous and grimy, and probably the calm before the storm. Mapool looks way too relaxed at the moment. Here's M80, the cause for some of the graffiti work, and Mapool shadowed on the wall. Huh, nice. Everyone in this stopping point has numbers for foreheads. Mapool really has main character design syndrome, huh? And is that V symbol a corporation? Like the front of a car, maybe? Here's a display of Cars New York. The city designs from this franchise can be quite enthralling, and it's no different here. With axles, a giant headlight window, giant X, and Del & Co. Some smiley relevant dude. And whatever this is supposed to present. Ooh, a tower made of tires? Cool. Engine building topper and some access for trains way down there. Okay, this is a weird one. This is a sentient diner. Not because buildings are alive now in this universe, but because some diners are literally repurposed train carriages. What? I've been to comedy venues built out of scrap metal rooms like this. Does that mean that they are sentient in the Cars world? Still, we're now out somewhere rural. The tale takes us much further than just Coney Island. Though, isn't it kind of horrifying to have train tracks that lead straight to your face? I feel like I would live in constant anxiety that someone turns wrong. Regardless, they serve pie. Genuine ally or a seductive betrayal? Those edgier movies are our inspiration after all. Then again, here's Mapool. Fittingly small and awfully jitty. Metro Ruffs. Is his name just literally Metro? I'm sticking with Mapool, thanks. Here's some more. Jump scares literally hop him off of the tracks. That's a safety hazard. And some more. What a big mouth he can have. Also, he literally has the MTA logo on his side, keeping things official and tied to the real world. Nice. Ooh, I love this. It's another commercial poster idea. Really sweet. I guess sticking on the theme of movie names just being the name of their protagonists. I guess that's exactly what this is. Very cool, very nice. Give me a London Underground poster and it's a 10 out of 10. Huh, I guess at some point this project was real close to a public announcement. They have some serious thought put into them. And the logo design for Metro is pretty in place. Don't spread, no karate, don't be long, we discriminate against limos here. No unloading, don't smog, and don't pee. Alright then. Love the face of the guy being chopped. More Mapool out in the calm day air. I think it's kind of clear that everything goes to hell overnight, so daytime is looking pretty chilled comparatively. Yeah, there's a kind of hellscape underbelly to New York when the sun goes down. This image featuring a monster truck-like beast, also with the Metro M, devil cars, which I think we see in Cars on the Road, and a symbolic furnace to be fearful of. Very cool. Or is it meant to literally be a sentient factory? That'd be freaky. Meanwhile, here's Mapool under scrutiny from a collective of peering trains.
Not quite running away from them, but they're clearly looking down on him as he traverses the graffitified underpass with fire art and F-box? Ooh, and this is Grand Central Terminal. I only recognize it because of Madagascar. What a nice reimagining, and clearly a point of interest. M80, doing no good, and being called out for it. The cheeky little guy is on the run from the police, same one as earlier I think, in front of loaders. That Mapool symbolically will get involved in at this story beat. Happening during sunset, so this could easily be early days in the plot before everything goes badly for Mapool. That's not Mapool, but it is a classic New York subway train. And an Axle trucker, world building. Just a great piece of grimy art. And some more with our subway train having an R on his head, which stands for Ray, short for rail. Still, more Axle, proper point of interest that, Wigwag and Signal Hotel. It's like, but they already have Signal Lager, don't they? It's cruising above the clutter of those peasant cars down there, followed by BAM! Another poster concept. They really had the imagery for this movie down in their heads. It's Mapool, parading through New York chased by cars, trains, and the void. Ray is also there and pretty peeved. There's a bin crane, the police cop, all blindingly bright against the billboards of commerce. Road Warrior and derails. It's a chase movie through and through. Ooh, and here's one spoiler. Someone's gonna bomb the tracks Mapool is on, and he's gonna have to literally jump like a roller coaster to get across. Horrifying, but judging by the height alone in this concept, it'd be nail-biting. And then we get some more of that Mad Max gang. Oddly enough, not at odds with Mapool. Maybe they'll even end up being unlikely allies, however brief. Crashing through something which looks like a kind of shipment harbor. Police cop's not gonna like that. But here's a colleague of his. Or maybe it is him, reimagined. Ray's here too, now with a bit of a beard. Weird. Is he just being questioned, like a low-stakes early poke before everything ramps up? It sure is cluttered with construction carts down here as well. Workers on their homeward commute, or is there work being done here? Or the aftermath of a crime scene and investigative officers? It's all really interesting trying to piece it together since we're never going to officially know, I imagine. Bustling New York, again, now showcasing pony tricks. Is that a character we'd see? More of that noughts and crosses building, an unamused bus, an ice cream truck, pre-bad times, and hey, mild police conflict. And a whole building shaped like an old steam train. It'd be kind of cool to imagine seeing every character early on during the day, before the events of the movie, and then repurposing them all in this cacophonous prompt. Huh, I can see it. I can see it all coming together. And that, my friends, is all she wrote artistically. But there is more news that came out of this prompt. The art director was set to be Ryan Carlson, and if these images were influenced by them, then it certainly sounded stellar. Previously doing Planes makes sense, and Hoodwink 2, and the Emoji Movies. And Super Pets. Odd. Jermaine Fowler was set to be the lead voice. I do not know who this is. I do not recognize any of these works, but Marvel's Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur seems the most relevant. And Raphael Sadiq was on the job of the score. Other quotes we can dissect, mostly from Twitter, following the logic behind the creation of the movie. With Steve Loter saying, "It would have been the grittiest and edgiest Cars film. It was moving the franchise into a new place. I developed this for 4 years, and I was really disappointed I didn't get a chance to finish it." Whereas Sunil Hall added in, "It would have been a very unique and unexpected take on the Cars universe. Still bummed we never got to take it past development, but it's nice to see some of the art has made it out into the wild." Essentially, though the project had multiple versions of the story drafted together, by the time it was cancelled, they actually had a script, as Sunil Hall had come onto the film by then. And from the sounds of their new take, it's a slightly grimmer sense than the upbeat spy elements of Cars 2. It would have been dark and dreary. A real shock to the system of an idea, but so enticing, right? Or as a fan put it, in a world of sentient vehicles, the existence of the train must be some kind of existential nightmare. They are prisoners of their tracks, forced to travel the same routes day after day, fully aware of their situation for their entire lives with no hope of escape. To which Sunil responded, "Yeah, we totally leaned into this." Steve wasn't afraid of exploring the darker implications of what a train's life would be like. We were gonna get nightmare fuel Thomas the Tank Engine, baby! So why was this production cancelled in the first place? When was it cancelled? Well, it's not entirely clear, but we did get a murmur of when it was supposed to release. As Steve says himself, I think 2021? That helps a lot with the timeline of events. But maybe it was a conceptual thing. Maybe it was because it wanted to be so dark and edgy, and that's just not the Disney way. Making a dark spin-off to a beloved Pixar franchise is an odd choice, or couldn't work with the limitations of a PG rating perhaps. Maybe it was because they were limited by the whole train idea. If they have to follow tracks the whole time, it becomes boring and stale fast. Maybe it was because it couldn't diversify from other train IPs like Thomas and Friends, of course. Maybe it was too New York. Who needs a Pixar spin-off in New York in 2021 when we were all literally set to get Pixar's Soul in 2020? Another first-party production said all about New York. Or maybe, since we're likely around the mid-2010s era of production, the movie just went down with the ship that is Disney Toon Studios, as they were shut down in June of 2018, liquidated into a third studio under Walt Disney Television Animation instead. Whatever the real reason, I think it's a damn shame. It sounds like it was pushing the boundary a little bit with a strong idea and crystal clear vision. It was just the wrong place, the wrong time. Steve Loter would go on to executive produce The Ghost and Molly McGee, and Marvel's Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur, hey, with Jermaine Fowler. And we already know Sunil Hall created The Mighty Ones. Is there any chance of this movie coming back? Well, they're clearly tight-lipped about it, but the Cars universe sure does like growing sprouts wherever it can. And it turns out, yes, there is a bit of a loophole to all of this. As Steve himself puts it, oddly enough, if I owned the story, I could make it as a live action without the vehicles being the characters. So who knows? That was Disney's cancelled Trains spin-off, and all the assets I could find. Every other source was too busy talking about the other cancelled Metro production, as in Metro 2033, and how they were trying to Americanize a clearly Russian story, but maybe we'll save that for another time. So to finally follow up on the most popular DreamWorks cancelled movie, we're now hopping over to the fan favorite company that is Pixar. Thank you to Spoderman for suggesting it on our Discord. Now, funnily enough, while searching through the cancelled projects that Pixar even has, I discovered just how rare it is for any of their projects to be axed. Internally, Pixar supposedly has a rigorous process that all of their scripts go through to become the Pixar standard. And this isn't the first time that complications have cropped up during the early phases. Pixar president Ed Catmull explained that Pixar films suck initially in development and require a lot of work to execute their hard-to-sell concepts. But even in some of the worst-case scenarios, such as in the early days of Ratatouille, when a project is particularly doomed, Pixar will instead completely restart and replace the head director with one of the Pixar veterans in order to handle the project to land on 2 feet. Hence why Brad Bird directed Ratatouille over the original director Jan Pinkava. But we're not here to talk about Ratatouille. We're here to talk about the most progressive Pixar cancellation ever made in the company's history, and most likely the most well-known one as well. And that is, of course, Newt. Apparently not even capitalized. This is a project that broke the mold for reaching as far into production as it did while still being stopped. Had it actually come out when planned, it would have been Pixar's 14th film, but of course, that wasn't the case. So what was it about, and how did it all go wrong? Well, it all begins with a guy called Gary Rydstrom. Not a fictional character as his name might imply, this was the guy who came up with the pitch of the show and was set to be the fresh-faced new director of this potential project. But he's certainly not a Pixar nobody. This guy has actually quite the successful career in sound design, winning multiple Oscars and nominations for his work and everything. This dude worked on Jurassic Park and Titanic and Saving Private Ryan. The guy's not totally out of his depth directing either, as he also went on to direct Lifted, the Pixar short. So to be the guy stepping a tad out of his lane for a new avenue would have been the perfect fit for this upcoming project. And Pixar's Newt would be Rydstrom's full-length feature directorial debut. As for the story itself, Rydstrom began his pitch around 2008 internally, and we have a couple testimonies of how it went down. Rydstrom came out wheeling a complicated 9-part Newt mating ritual chart, oh god, like you'd find in a science lab or biology class. Rydstrom says the film is about the last 2 blue-footed newts on this earth, a male and a female, who are thrown together by science and cannot stand each other. Newt, our lead, has been in captivity since he was a tadpole. He's lonely. His only friend is a lifeless sock puppet. He can see the mating ritual chart from his cage and practices day in and day out, good luck making that wholesome, getting ready for scientists to capture him a girlfriend. And who can't relate to that, asked Rydstrom. Seems like a depressing insight into Gary's mind if practicing mating rituals is relatable, but sure, I can see the aspect of stressing for a future partner and loneliness, etc., you know. Anyway, back to the story. Unfortunately, the 9th and final step is obscured by a Mr. Coffee. Alright.
so he doesn't know how the ritual ends. Hey, you want some spoilers for a movie that's 13 years old and also doesn't exist? Whoa, there's the final part of the blue-footed newt mating ritual. Oh, actually there is none. Now that I've actually had to find it. I tried looking it up, and it's definitely stained my search history, but there are no real blue-footed newts. But in regards to a mating ritual, I can only really see that they shake their tails a bit. No 9-step dance pose in reality. Kind of a shame, really. I'd want to see a dancing newt, I think. So there was an attempt of educational facts on Daz Reviews, I guess. Back to Newt, thematically, it's the way of life. You want to know step 9 and there's a Mr. Coffee in front of it. Yeah, okay, Gary. But I can see what he was going for. Sure, I'm making jabs, and it sure is typical that the name of our Newt protagonist is literally Newt, but it's simple enough, and there's more to know. Our female lead goes by the normal name of Brooke, and she's got details too. Being the last female blue-footed newt, she is in the wild and has no idea she's the last female of her species. She escapes all sorts of dangers in her day-to-day life, including being evasive of these crazy biologists who are always chasing her. Rystrom describes her evasive capabilities as making her an amphibious Errol Flynn, a reference that's admittedly a bit beyond me, and looking it up, yeah, I wouldn't have picked this up. One day they catch Brooke and bring her back to the lab and present her to Newt, where they have the world's worst first date before, through circumstances, they both end up in the wild. It's at this point the vast majority of concept art can really come into play, showing the colourful wilds and blooming potential cinematography. Suspiciously, there are examples of other blue-footed newts shown in places, so either that's somewhat of a spoiler that resolves the conflict, it's an error that they couldn't get over, or maybe it's just some flashback. I don't know. We'll never know. Even still, Newt is worthless out here, but Brooke gets him through the trials. They meet a character named Eddie, a giant hellbender salamander. Hey, I actually know what that is through Animal Crossing, kinda. And fun fact, salamanders and newts are both part of the same family, the Salamandridae family. All newts are salamanders, but not all salamanders are newts. Anyway, Eddie's a ladies' man and passes along his incredibly shallow ideas of love to Newt. Great. Of course, they predictably don't work. And that's the most of these super detailed parts of the story, at least in writing. Seemingly simple enough, but there are cracks to be pried here and there, and we'll hear about them soon enough. But also, let's take a closer look at all of the visuals we did get to see, as there are elements not mentioned in these verbal synopses. We could see other newts were to make an appearance in at least one other color form, if this lily pad art is anything to go by, but there's also a surprising emphasis on the scientists themselves in the art, strongly suggesting that they too were set to be main characters of the story. In fact, with one of them being male and the other female, I wouldn't be surprised if there was a romantic dichotomy going on there just for the sake of theming. Still, there is an extra look at the female scientist in particular, seeming like the artsy type as well, based off of this bird-watching shot where she's seen painting a couple hummingbirds too. A real insight to her personality. Though maybe that's just when she takes her glasses off. Every other shot seems way more in business mode for her. There are other inclinations of characters, like this collection of rats? Moles? Either way, they seem to be like a family collective. Logically, it could make sense with a side setting if they're rats, or it could just as easily be a feature out in the wild. Perhaps again there is to pop up the theme of starting a family from someone who's already far down that path of reproduction. I can see it all coming together. Then we full on see our salamander, looking just about as I'd expect really. Sometimes underwater and sometimes not. Another we get is this creepy two-headed snake. Again, an experiment with a rare condition, or just a wild villain. Whatever the case, here's another with a more severe case of Medusa syndrome, I guess. I don't actually know if Medusa syndrome's a word, I just made it up. You know what I mean. Looks like one head's more aggressive than the other, whilst another rendition has just one head, either looking like something out of Jungle Book or being gigantic with this nice silhouette behind a leaf. I like it. There's also eggs with eyes, this bug-catching human, a shrimp, a tortoise, and this thing here, titled just as Monstro. How mysterious. All making singular appearances. Feels kind of like a mashup of other Pixar films in theme to me. I get a Finding Nemo sense from some of these. Newt just looks like a nicer Randall, whilst I get a Bug's Life vibe in some other shots. I mean, here's the final major one to see. A giant owl as a for certain wild antagonist. First seen out on some countryside fields, but then in this really beautiful concept shot along this wooden hallway. I can only imagine how that would have all panned out visually, especially with the modern cinematography cinematography of Pixar films in the last decade. I mean, the other landscape shots are pretty great too. Mossy rocks and a river, gangly crop fields, overhead leafature to squint at, smelling at flowers for the first time, the Newt crossing sign over a tree trunk, all this dynamic shot on top of a speeding car in the rain. It looks great. And my personal favorite, underwater at a lily pad pond. Mwah. Beyond that, we can see a young Brooke presumably starting out in the wild, a collection of relatives under a rocky overhead spot, an interesting form of travel for the Newts, and more creatures and humans in a small collage image. How exactly it would all come together, we can only imagine. But with the general premise set, vision clearly created, and early details there, the film was given its original scheduled release as being summer of 2011, a year after Toy Story 3 essentially. However, things would soon change. A little later on, it was simply delayed to summer of 2012, and then at a Pixar event in April 2010, it was told that Brave would now take on the 2012 slot. And Newt made no such appearance at all. It wasn't given an updated release date or anything. Additionally, the film was removed from Disney's A to Z Encyclopedia supplement by Chief Archivist Dave Smith. Things weren't looking grand. People declined to comment, other sources said Newt was taken off development schedule to allow for focus on upcoming projects, and an unsigned message received at Smith's email stated the film has been cancelled, sparking all sorts of speculation. So what happened? Clearly, problems were emerging, and there's a good few guesses as to why. For one, other animation studios were making other animations, of course, and one seemed to tread suspiciously close to the Newt plotline, but a little ahead in production. You may have heard of it before, Rio. Again, focusing on a last of their species animal tackling the outside world whilst worrying about propagating the species. John Lasseter, oh this guy, did later admit that there was a resemblance, but of course didn't confirm that this was the reasoning behind cancellation. This could have very well been a low blow though that required a lot of Pixar reworking in order to just not create a second duplicate film. Also, Rango was another movie that annoyingly popped up with similarities. So clearly, internal works were going on, as it was confirmed not too much later that the dynamic choice to replace directors was put in effect here. Just like with Ratatouille and Brad Bird, Pixar's star director Pete Docter was put on board to replace Gary Rydstrom in order to rework the pitch from the ground up in a way that would be possible. This guy's made some movies you probably like. What we know of this reworked version is very, very little, but we do know a little bit of the Pete Docter experience, and by that I mean he had other ideas in mind. Newt was another unlikely idea that wasn't working, and when we gave it to somebody new, he said, I'll do it, but I have another idea altogether which I think is better, as was told by Ed Catmull years later. And presumably, following an assessment of the idea, the studio agreed that this new pitch for what if feelings had feelings was a better, bold concept to develop over an attempt to right the troubles that Newt was experiencing. So at the end of the day, the elimination of Newt probably came from a combination of things. The idea wasn't perfect and would go on to require a lot of work internally to get the story off the ground. On top of that, other production companies were making similar movies that likely would have bogged down Newt more. And the final nail in the coffin, even when Pixar reinstalled directors, the new guy had something in mind that would ultimately become a far more workable and overall successful production in Inside Out, taking up Newt's final slot, releasing in May of 2015. But of course, Newt hasn't been entirely forgotten. Not only am I talking about it now, and it's a pretty popular project considering the early marketing it was given, but also remnants of the project still linger through the films that did hit cinemas. We all know Pixar likes to infer future movies inside of their movies, and the Newt references are rife as well. There's a Newt crossing sign clearly visible on the wall of Andy's room in Toy Story 3. That's probably the one you know best. In Brave, during the witch's scene, she picks up a Newt to add to her poison, simple enough. And also in The Good Dinosaur, a real embodiment of the worst case final outcome for Pixar, there's a whole close-up shot of a prehistoric Newt. Clearly the theme behind the scenes was still there after all Newt had gone through. Apparently there were actors said to be on board with this project, including the likes of Ben Stiller, William Shatner, and Dabney Coleman, who I recognize mostly. And hey, considering Ben Stiller and Owen Wilson are quite the movie duo, I guess it was only a matter of time to pick the other one after the likes of Lightning McQueen was such a success. I wonder which role would have been given to John Ratzenberger. Of course, when the movie faded away, the celebrities just continued on their way. And whatever happened to Gary Rydstrom? Well, since the likes of Newt, he's gone on to direct another Pixar short by the name of Hawaiian Vacation. Nice. So I guess not a total disaster story. Beyond that though, Pixar's got a pretty tight record when it comes to their cancelled films. Sure, there's the trilogy spin-off sequels from the phase of Disney Circle 7 animation, but other than this, the only note I have is of a film called Yellow Car in 1998, which was rebirthed into Cars years later. So the company's doing pretty good. And though I doubt we'll ever see a real Newt resurrection, it sure would be intriguing to imagine what Pixar would do with a premise like this. Mating ritual and all. I'll end things off with a final summary that I actually think sounds like a nice piece of writing. Newt and Brooke embark on a perilous, unpredictable adventure and discover that finding a mate never goes as planned, even when you only have one choice. Love, it turns out, is not a science. Guess after all of that, I've got Newt else to say.
And that was all of the cancelled Pixar productions over the years. And while there is almost a certainty that there will be more cancelled productions to talk about in some time in the future, for now, these 5 are just it. From a studio that is held at some of the highest status, it's interesting to see the ones that just didn't make the cut. And though some of the DreamWorks productions may be a little bit more popular individually, I think this collection is a really interesting showcase of lost media. But that's all I have to show you. For now, my name's been Daz. Thank you very much for reaching the end of this video. Which one's your favorite? Do let me know. And I shall see you all in a little bit.